Okay, this is the weirdest book that we know of. I'm not making that up. This is the Voynich manuscript, a book that's so strange that to this day, no one really knows what it means. It's in a language that no one has ever decoded. It has images that people cannot make sense out of. We do not know when it was written. We do not know what it's about. It's currently in a sort of special collections library at Yale University. It's weird. And in it is a creature that may or may not be an armadillo. It may also be the Catobeplas, which is a monster from the ancient world and was written about and drawn all through the medieval and up to the Renaissance period. This book is the Book of Imaginary Beings by Jorge Louis Borges, the great Argentinian writer. And it includes a very interesting description of the Catobeplas and other monsters and imaginary beings. It's a wonderful book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. But in it, he makes a very interesting distinction, which we want to talk about today in Monsterology. Borges says there are necessary monsters and unnecessary or ephemeral monsters. And then he doesn't really explain what he means by this. He gives two examples. So in today's Monsterology, we want to look at the mystery of what is a necessary monster. All right, welcome.
All right, here are the images that we're going to be creating today. This one is Hekatonkheires, the 100-handed monster of ancient Greek mythology. And this is a Chinese dragon, which I did using India ink. I'll show you the technique on this one. This is the Catobeplas that I mentioned, a creature which I'm going to describe shortly. And then this is the famous Chimera of the ancient Greek tradition. And I'm going to try to explain, why I chose these images in the context of this mystery that we're going to discuss today, which is, what is a necessary monster versus an unnecessary monster. And here I'm doing a digital drawing in the iPad Procreate program, just drawing using the iPencil, and then you'll see me sort of adding arm after arm. This was not easy to do because it's sort of an anatomical nightmare, and you still want it to look vaguely realistic, at least in its component parts. The Hekatonkheires is the creature described in Homer's Iliad. There's three of them. It's also described in Hesiod's Theogony. The three characters that are sort of 100-handed, or in Latin, they're called the Centimanes. One is Cotus, the other is Briareus, and the third is Gyges. Briareus is really the most famous of the Hekatonkheires. They're the offspring of Gaia, the earth goddess, and Uranos. And Gaia and Uranos created several sort of species of creature. One, most famously perhaps, are the Titans, but also the Cyclops, the 100-handed creatures here, and also the giants. And there's some debate about, what role the 100-handed creatures had. Some thought that they fought alongside the Titans against the Olympians. That's one tradition, and then Hesiod suggests they fought against the Titans. I included them here at the beginning because I wanted to just mention or sort of have an example of a fairly obscure monster, a monster that has not really become popular in sort of modern culture and really didn't catch on in general, even in ancient culture. There are, of course, legends about the Hekatonkheires, but they're really not like the centaurs or the Hydra. They didn't sort of capture the popular imagination in the same way. And that leads me to this question that is formulated in Jorge Louis Borges' book, Imaginary Beings. He asked this interesting question in the foreword. He says, what's the difference between certain kinds of monsters? You'd think that we would have as many monsters as the human imagination can construct, almost infinite number, he says. But in fact, that's not the case. We really have a very finite number of monsters that seems to populate the imagination. And so that raises this question of why do some creatures, fantastic imaginary creatures, become popular and others sort of don't make the cut, so to speak. And he says the dragon is an example of a necessary monster. He says there is something in the image of the dragon that is congenial to man's imagination, and thus the dragon arises in many latitudes and ages, end quote. And I just got thinking about this. He doesn't really explain what he means by this. He contrasts this with what he calls the ephemeral monster, the unnecessary monster. And here he gives two examples, which I'm going to get to later. One is the Chimera, and the other is the Catobeplas. There he says, those are creatures that don't seem to have the same universal quality that activates human imagination, everywhere and in every culture. He says there, in those cases, quote, these creatures are too heterogeneous. Look at the Chimera, for example. The lion, the goat, and the serpent, they resist merging into a single animal. And then he's off and running with his book of imaginary beings. And I wanted to spend a little time thinking about this and really just exploring this question of what makes a good monster and in what sense are they necessary. It seems to me that one option is that he's suggesting that some of these are psychologically inevitable given a kind of universal human nature or human cognition. This is the kind of thing that somebody like Carl Jung would have gotten excited about and called, a sort of archetype. Are there certain images that either through some kind of metaphysical process, via Plato's epistemology, we have access to these forms or archetypes, or maybe given sort of evolution and the evolution of cognition, we just have a tendency to categorize the world with certain kind of folk taxonomies, including these particular kinds of creatures. Another way in which it could be necessary is that somehow there's a kind of hybrid coherence, like the composition of, say, a snake and an eagle is a better combination than something like a lion, a goat, and a serpent. Maybe what he's suggesting here is that certain kinds of hybrid fantastic combinations become sticky memes. They travel, they stick to us cognitively, and they travel well. So I can draw this and you can see it and it sticks to you, and you can draw it and talk about it and it sticks to the people you talk to, and before you know it you have a meme that is spreading through the population. So the Hydra, for example, is a good example. Many religious and folk and mythological traditions have a Hydra, and is that a sticky meme in the way that Borges is suggesting when he talks about necessary monsters? And then there's sort of a third option, which is there a kind of aesthetic, organic sort of consideration here? Like, is it that some monsters are just more believable because they're more internally coherent? And this is a little, perhaps maybe seems a little obscure, but maybe to give it more sort of concrete meaning, Da Vinci talked about in one of his notebooks. He has an entry that says how to make an imaginary animal look natural. And he says the trick is, no matter what you piece together, you have to make the parts have a kind of hyper accuracy so that you can tell, oh, that's the head of a giraffe, and that's the foot of a cow or something. So in other words, the creature has to be a sort of coherent mashup. I don't really know the answer to this mystery. I mean, I'm not even sure what it means to say that a fictional creature has a kind of organic coherence. I mean, Plato talks about this in the Phaedrus. He's describing what a good story is really like. And he says, we've all heard bad stories and they're kind of incoherent. And he says a good story is sort of like a good organism. And he makes this weird analogy from art to biology, where, just as a organism, an animal has to have sort of a good functional adaptation to its environment, so too a good story has to have its own functional orientation and adaptation. And it has to sort of fit well with itself, not just its external environment. So I was just drawing the Catobeplas, which is this crazy creature, and now I'm drawing the Chimera. The Catobeplas, as I said at the very outset, may or may not appear in the Voynich manuscript, but there's references to the Catobeplas back in Pliny the Elder, in Da Vinci's notebooks, in Ficino during the Renaissance, in Edward Topsell and Conrad Gesner, and again in the Renaissance. And it was thought to be a creature that its head was so heavy on a long neck that it was always bowed down, eating its grass or whatever, but if it looked up at you with its eyes, it would basically kill you instantly. So I drew that creature sort of just according to the description that Pliny gives of it. And here I'm drawing the Chimera based on a very famous sculpture called the Chimera of Arezzo from around 400 BCE, and this is considered a sort of masterpiece of Etruscan bronze casting, and here I'm just doing sort of a version of it. You may recall that the Chimera is one of the offspring of monsters Typhon and Echidna, which are both kind of sea monsters. In Homer's Iliad, the Chimera is described as female, and to quote the Iliad, she was of divine stock, not of men. In the forepart a lion, in the hind part a serpent, and in the middle a goat, breathing fire in terrible fashion. And the legend is that King Iobates of Lycia, which is now southern coast of Turkey, saw the Chimera killing cattle and terrorizing people, and he asked the hero Bellerophon to kill this creature, the Chimera. So Bellerophon and his winged steed Pegasus fought the Chimera, and he forced lead down its throat, and this, together with the flame that the Chimera produces, actually melted the lead and then suffocated the creature. Now, what does Borges mean when he suggests that this creature is really not a necessary monster, but an ephemeral monster? And again, his quote was, "It's too heterogeneous, the lion, the goat, and the serpent, resisting merging into a single animal." And I'm left with, a kind of mystery here, because I have a sense of what he's suggesting, but not a clear theory. And so I'm open to suggestions. Anybody wants to sort of leave stuff in the comments and guide us really in a particular direction, that's most welcome. I do think there's some issue here that's really relevant as to what becomes, as I was saying before, a sticky meme, because we have to think about monsters in this sort of epidemiological way. They spread through cultures like a disease might spread through a society, and that means they must have certain features that really grab onto human cognition and then can get passed from one person to another horizontally, but also from one generation to another vertically. And so some monsters, again, seem to be much more popular than others. And at least according to Borges, the Chimera doesn't make the cut. Now, I don't know, this is arguable. I think it's pretty compelling. But I do think it's also slightly silly that the goat head is emerging out of the top of the creature. And this does look strangely artificial and almost slightly laughable. There's something humorous about this monster. Maybe this is just me. And this might be what Borges is trying to get at, is some kind of hard to express organic unity, even for fantastical or imaginary creatures. So anyway, this is something that I hope to be able to explore in future episodes, and I just wanted to raise it in the context of this episode, just as a kind of introduction. So here's the final drawing. It's a kind of watercolor pencil, and then I used water to kind of shade and blend the pencil drawing together. If you like this kind of thing, please hit the subscribe button and come back for more content, because I basically post something every couple of weeks. All right, have a good one and take care.